What if everything you thought you knew about God's chosen people was wrong? What if the first chosen people, the Israelites, weren't the figures we've been shown in religious art, but a black people with deep roots in Africa, whose story has been hidden for centuries? This is not a conspiracy. It is a powerful truth, one that is beginning to emerge from the shadows of history, revealing the divine connection that has always existed between Africa and Israel. For too long, we have been taught to look at the Bible through a lens that distorts the truth. The face of Moses, of Jesus, of the apostles, they have been whitewashed, scrubbed of their African identity to fit a narrative of exclusion and division. But now, as time moves forward, we are rediscovering the truth. The children of Israel, the first chosen people of God, were deeply connected to Africa, both spiritually and physically. In this video, we're going to uncover a truth that has been hidden for far too long. We will dive deep into ancient records, archaeological evidence, and biblical scriptures that confirm a powerful reality. The Israelites were not isolated from Africa. They were part of its divine story, children of the soil that gave birth to civilization. You'll learn how the divine legacy of the Israelites, long tied to Africa, has been concealed, and how uncovering this truth changes everything we've been told about race, religion, and history. If you've ever felt disconnected from the divine, if you've ever wondered why the images of God's chosen people seem so foreign to you, then this video is for you. Together, we'll explore the divine heritage that is yours by birthright and discover a story that is as old as time itself. So, if you're ready to open your eyes to the truth and embrace the divine calling that has always been within you, stay with me until the end. This is not just about reclaiming history. It's about reclaiming your place in God's eternal plan. Let's begin the journey together. The first chosen people were black. Imagine for a moment the divine truth that has been buried beneath the weight of history. The truth that the first people chosen by God, the Israelites, were not the pale faces we have come to know in Western religious art. What if I told you that for centuries, the true identity of these divinely selected people was hidden? That the Israelites were a black people with roots deeply embedded in Africa, chosen by Yahweh to carry his word to the nations. This truth has always been there, but for too long, it was buried beneath the veil of a colonial narrative that sought to erase the connection between God's chosen and Africa. Let's walk back through the pages of the Bible. In the book of Exodus, Moses, raised as an Egyptian, is mistaken for an Egyptian by the daughters of Midian. Exodus 2:19. But why would they confuse Moses for an Egyptian unless Moses himself looked like one? And who were the Egyptians, beloved, but people of Africa with dark skin, coiled hair, and broad features? If Moses looked like an Egyptian, then the Israelites, his people, must have shared that same appearance, that same heritage. Moses, who was called by God to lead the people of Israel, was a reflection of the African roots of Israel itself. For too long, this truth has been suppressed. We've been shown whitewashed images of biblical figures, but the scriptures themselves have always told us a different story. The Israelites were not isolated from Africa. They were part of it. From Abraham, the father of faith, who journeyed through Egypt, to Moses, raised in Pharaoh's house, to the Israelites wandering through the wilderness, their connection to Africa is undeniable. The faith that grew within the Israelites, the covenant with God, was not a new concept. It was rooted in the spiritual wisdom that had been carried for millennia by the African nations around them. This understanding shifts everything we've been taught about the Bible and our connection to it. The erasure of the African identity of the Israelites has kept us from understanding who we really are in God's divine plan. We have been taught to look outside of ourselves for validation, to believe that we are not part of the story. But the truth, beloved, is that we are the story. The Israelites' divine identity is our divine identity. and the God who walked with them is the same God who walks with us today. The Black Israelites were chosen not because of their physical appearance, but because of the divine purpose placed upon them by God. In the same way, we are chosen, not because of our skin color, but because God has placed His divine purpose within us. The faith of Israel, deeply rooted in African tradition, is the foundation for understanding our place in God's eternal story. As we understand this, we are reminded that the Israelites were not isolated figures. They were a part of a much broader divine plan that spanned generations, across lands, and into the hearts of many nations. Their identity was not just about being a people, but about carrying the divine word, the covenant, to the world. And that divine purpose continues to live within us today. Now, as we delve into the influence of African culture on the Bible, we see the undeniable marks of African spiritual practices on the traditions of the Israelites. From the very beginning, the Israelites were not isolated in their practices. They were deeply influenced by the ancient African cultures around them, cultures that had long known the divine. The people of Israel did not create their spiritual customs in isolation. They inherited them from the ancient African traditions that preceded them. For instance, the practice of circumcision, which was commanded to the Israelites by God, was not a new practice. It was an ancient African tradition. Many African tribes had practiced circumcision for millennia before it was adopted by the Israelites as a sign of the covenant with God. The Israelites did not invent circumcision. They inherited it as a sacred practice passed down through generations of African communities who understood its spiritual significance. The tradition of circumcision is a reminder that the Israelites were not an isolated people. They were deeply connected to the spiritual practices of the African nations around them, connected to the divine in ways that have been passed down through generations. Similarly, the practice of the Sabbath, a day of rest and spiritual reflection, was not an innovation of the Israelites. It was a practice that had been known for centuries in African civilizations, particularly in Egypt. The Israelites, after their time in Egypt, adopted the Sabbath as a day of rest and spiritual renewal. But it wasn't just a custom. The Sabbath was a divine instruction from God, reinforcing the connection between the Israelites and the African spiritual practices they had inherited. The same can be said for many of the other laws, rituals, and customs in the Bible that mirror ancient African practices that were part of the divine wisdom shared across generations, from Egypt to Ethiopia to the Israelites themselves. In examining the Bible, we must also look at the linguistic ties between Hebrew and the languages of Africa. The Hebrew language, the sacred tongue of the Israelites, shares deep connections with African languages, particularly those spoken in Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt. The Afroasiatic language family, to which Hebrew belongs, spans across Africa with similar linguistic structures and roots found in African dialects like Amharic, Berber, and Hausa. This linguistic evidence is not just a coincidence, it is a testament to the deep connection between the Israelites and Africa. As we continue to explore this deeper understanding of the Bible, we see that the African roots of Israel are not just symbolic, they are foundational. The people of Israel were not foreign to Africa, they were part of its divine story, its spiritual lineage. The connection between the Israelites and Africa runs through the very heart of the Bible, from the stories of Abraham's journey through Egypt to the Exodus led by Moses, from the prophetic words spoken in the wilderness to the divine wisdom that guided Israel through its trials. This truth changes everything, beloved. It brings a healing power that reconnects us with our heritage, with the divine story that has always been ours. It reaffirms our place in God's eternal plan, reminding us that we are not outside of the divine narrative, we are at the very heart of it. The faith of Israel, rooted in African traditions, is a living, breathing part of who we are. And as we reclaim this truth, we begin to understand our divine calling. The story of the Israelites is not a story of the past. It is our story, and it is still unfolding today. We are the heirs of that divine covenant, and it is time for us to embrace our place in God's plan. The African heritage of the Israelites is not a distant memory. It is a living truth that we must carry forward, shining the light of divine truth to the world. As we walk forward, let us do so with the knowledge that we are not lost. We are found. We are not separate from the divine plan. We are a vital part of it. The same God who called the Israelites, who walked with them through the wilderness, is the same God who calls us today. The journey of Israel is our journey, and it is time for us to embrace the divine purpose that God has placed within us. As we conclude this part of the journey, I encourage you to reflect on the truth you have just uncovered. The divine heritage of the Israelites is your heritage. The African roots of the Israelites are your roots. The divine purpose they carried is your purpose. Embrace this truth and let it guide you as you walk boldly in the light of your divine identity. The time has come for us to stand tall, united in our heritage, and fulfill the divine calling that has always been ours. The erasure of history and the change in religious imagery have been some of the most profound acts of spiritual distortion ever carried out against a people. For centuries, the faces of God's chosen people were whitewashed, stripped of their identity, and reimagined to fit a narrative that served the dominant powers. The image of Jesus, the apostles and the prophets became pale, marble figures, shadows of the divine truth that once was. The divine history of Israel, the first chosen people, was hidden from view, manipulated and suppressed to fit a colonial agenda. But the truth, beloved, is rising now, and we can no longer turn away from it. It is time to reclaim what was stolen, to resurrect the true image of God's chosen people, to restore the sacred truth of their identity as Black, as African, as divine. The story of the Israelites, the first chosen people, was never meant to be separate from Africa. The roots of their faith, their connection to the divine, and their journey with God were all deeply connected to Africa. Yet, as history progressed, these connections were hidden, erased, and replaced with a false narrative that did not reflect the truth of the divine identity of Israel. Through the manipulation of religious imagery, through the alteration of sacred texts, and the portrayal of divine figures as white, the identity of God's people was lost to the world. We were told to believe that the face of Christ was white, that Moses and the prophets were white, that the Israelites themselves were somehow separate from Africa, when in reality they were an integral part of it. Consider the book of Exodus, where Moses, raised in Egypt, is mistaken for an Egyptian by the daughters of Midian. Exodus 2:19. But why would they confuse Moses for an Egyptian unless Moses himself looked like one? Who were the Egyptians, if not Africans, with dark skin, coiled hair, and broad features? If Moses looked like an Egyptian, then it follows that the Israelites, his people, must have looked like him. They were not strangers to Africa, they were children of it. And yet, for centuries, this simple truth has been obscured, and the true identity of the Israelites, those who walked with God and carried his covenant, has been hidden behind a veil of whitewashed religious imagery. This distortion of religious imagery was not just an innocent misunderstanding. It was a deliberate act of spiritual colonization. Colonial powers sought to replace the faces of the divine with those that reflected their own image, erasing the African roots of God's chosen people. By doing so, they sought to sever the connection between Africa and the divine, to place themselves at the center of the spiritual narrative. The first step in erasing the true identity of the Israelites was to change the way they were depicted, turning dark-skinned people into pale European faces. This act of erasure was not just about art or imagery, it was about power. By rewriting the visual history of the divine, colonial powers sought to control the narrative of God's people, shaping it to fit their own agenda. But the truth, beloved, is far more powerful than any distorted image. The Bible itself has always spoken to us about the true identity of the Israelites. From the book of Exodus to the New Testament, we are told about the divine connection between the Israelites and Africa. The people of Israel were not isolated from Africa. They were a part of it. Their faith, their customs, their language, and their very identity were rooted in the soil of Africa. From Abraham's journey through Egypt to Moses' time in Pharaoh's house, to the Israelites wandering through the wilderness, Africa was not just a neighboring land. It was the very foundation of their story. The divine wisdom that was carried through the Israelites was a continuation of the wisdom that had been passed down through generations of African spiritual leaders, prophets, and priests. But it was not just the Israelites who were connected to Africa. The very image of the divine itself is rooted in Africa. The name of Yahweh, the God of Israel, was not new to the Israelites. It was an ancient name that had been known and revered by African civilizations long before Israel was formed as a nation. The divine wisdom of Africa, the same wisdom that built the pyramids, created the ancient kingdoms of Kush, and developed the first known systems of writing, was the same wisdom that the Israelites carried with them. The connection between Africa and the divine has always been there, but for too long it was hidden from view. Now, as the truth is coming to light, we must begin to reclaim that divine wisdom, that divine heritage, and that divine truth. This erasure of history has caused a deep wound, beloved, a wound that can only be healed by reclaiming the truth of our identity. When we understand that the Israelites were not distant figures, but our ancestors, the divine connection we've long been searching for is restored. We are not outside the divine narrative. We are at the heart of it. The story of the Israelites is our story, and their journey is our journey. The God who walked with them is the same God who walks with us today. Africa is not a distant land. It is the cradle of divinity. It is the place where the first divine wisdom was birthed, and it is the place where the first chosen people were called. The African heritage of the Israelites is not a distant memory. It is a living, breathing reality that is still present within us today. The divine calling that was placed on the Israelites is the same calling that is placed on us. The same God who chose them to carry his light to the nations is the same God who has chosen us. This is the divine legacy we are called to reclaim, to carry forward, and to share with the world. As we move into the next part of this journey, we must understand the profound impact that Africa has had on the Bible itself. The influence of African culture on the faith of Israel is undeniable. The customs, traditions, and spiritual practices of the Israelites were deeply rooted in African traditions that predate Israel itself. The practice of circumcision, for example, was not unique to the Israelites. It was an ancient African tradition that was passed down to them. The practice of observing the Sabbath, a day of rest and spiritual renewal, was not created by the Israelites. It was a practice that had been known and observed in Africa for millennia. These customs and spiritual practices were not isolated to Israel. They were shared by the African nations surrounding them, and they were the foundation upon which Israel's faith was built. The Bible tells us that God's people were called to be a light to the nations, to carry his divine message to the world. But that message was not just for the Israelites, it was for all people, especially for those of African descent, whose divine heritage had been hidden for so long. The Israelites were not just the chosen people, they were the chosen people who carried the divine message of unity, of healing, and of connection to the divine. And now, beloved, it is our turn to carry that message. It is our turn to shine the light of God's love and truth into the world, to stand in the fullness of our divine identity, and to share the truth of our heritage with all people. Africa is the birthplace of divinity, and it is from this sacred land that the light of God's love will shine once again. The truth that has been hidden for centuries is now being revealed, and it is time for us to embrace our place in the divine narrative. As we walk forward, let us walk with the confidence that we are not outsiders. We are children of the first chosen people of God. We are the heirs of a divine legacy, and it is our time to shine. As we continue to explore the truth of God's chosen people, it is essential that we turn to the evidence that lies in the soil, in the stones, in the ancient texts. These are the physical markers that confirm what we have long known in our hearts but struggled to see with our eyes. The Israelites, the first chosen people of God, were black. This revelation isn't just rooted in spiritual conviction. It's supported by hard, undeniable evidence found through scientific and archaeological discoveries. These are not simply theories. They are truths that have been waiting for the world to recognize. The undeniable connection between the Israelites and Africa is being brought to light by modern archaeology. From the discovery of ancient Hebrew inscriptions in southern Egypt to the findings in the kingdom of Cush and beyond, we are finally understanding the depth of the relationship between the Israelites and their African heritage. The idea that the Israelites were a people who originated solely in the Middle East has been shown to be an oversimplification and, in many cases, an outright falsehood. One of the most significant discoveries in recent years was the unearthing of Hebrew inscriptions in Egypt, inscriptions that suggest Jewish communities had existed in Egypt for centuries. These communities were not just exiles or visitors. They were established, living within African borders, deeply embedded in the African soil. This challenges the common belief that the Israelites' entire story is rooted solely in the ancient land of Israel and points to a much broader spiritual connection to Africa. This discovery is not isolated. In Zimbabwe, ancient artifacts bearing Hebrew-like inscriptions were found, further corroborating the connection between the Israelites and Africa. This evidence brings forth a deeper understanding of the true identity of the Israelites. They were not distant from Africa, they were a part of it. In addition to these archaeological findings, the connection between the Israelites and Africa is mirrored in language. Hebrew, the sacred language of the Israelites, belongs to the Afroasiatic language family, a linguistic group that spans parts of Africa and Asia. This linguistic connection tells us that the Israelites were not outsiders to Africa, but deeply rooted within it. The language of the Israelites shares similarities with languages spoken in Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt, indicating a strong cultural and historical bond with the African continent. This connection is not a coincidence. It is divine alignment, a sign that the chosen people of God were always meant to be part of the larger African narrative. But even beyond the hard evidence, the spiritual implications of these discoveries are profound. When we understand that the Israelites were deeply connected to Africa, we are reminded that God's divine calling is not confined to one people, one place, or one race. The Israelites were chosen by God to carry His message to the world, and that message is universal. As we rediscover the true identity of the Israelites, we are also rediscovering our own divine heritage. This isn't just about the Israelites' past, it's about our future. The same God who walked with them in the wilderness walks with us today. This is a pivotal moment in history, beloved. The truth that has been hidden for so long is finally coming to light, and it changes everything. It changes how we view the Bible, how we view ourselves, and how we view our place in God's divine plan. The identity of the Israelites as a black people is not just a fact to be celebrated. It is a call to action. It is a call for us to stand tall in our own identity, to embrace our divine heritage, and to carry the light of God's truth to the world. Now, as we turn to a new perspective on God's chosen people, we begin to see how the divine legacy that was passed down through the Israelites has continued into our own lives. The choice of the Israelites was never meant to exclude anyone. It was always meant to include all of humanity, to bring us closer to the divine truth that transcends race, geography, and time. The choice of the Israelites is our choice, and the divine calling placed upon them is the same calling placed upon us. We are not separate from the divine narrative. We are part of it. The Israelites were chosen to be a light to the nations, and now, as we awaken to this truth, we are called to be that light. The divine calling that was given to them is not a thing of the past. It is alive and active in our lives today. We are the continuation of that divine story, and it is time for us to embrace our place in it. The understanding that the Israelites were black, deeply connected to Africa, is not just about historical accuracy. It is about reclaiming our own identity in Christ. For centuries, we have been told that we are disconnected from the divine story, that we are outsiders. But the truth is that we have always been part of that story. The divine wisdom, the faith, and the covenant that were given to the Israelites were meant for us, for all of us. The erasure of our heritage has been a spiritual wound, but now, as we reclaim this truth, we begin to heal. This is not just a moment of rediscovery. It is a moment of spiritual awakening. As we embrace the divine truth of our heritage, we reclaim our place in God's plan. We are not lost, we are found. We are not disconnected, we are deeply rooted in the divine story of Israel. The same God who chose Israel to carry his message to the world has chosen us to do the same. The divine calling is alive in us today, and it is time for us to step into it. This is a call to action, beloved. It is time for us to rise, to embrace our heritage, and to carry the light of God's truth to the world. The first chosen people of God were black, and their divine calling was not just for them. It is for us all. Let us walk boldly in the truth of our identity, embrace our divine calling, and carry that light to the world. As we stand in the light of this truth, we are reminded that we are not isolated in our faith. The story of the Israelites is our story, and it is a story of divine unity. The Israelites were chosen not to be separate, but to show the world the way to God. And now, it is our turn. Let us walk together in the light of God's truth, reclaiming our divine heritage and carrying his message to the world. The time has come for us to step into our place as the heirs of God's divine covenant. The story of Israel is our story, and we are chosen to carry that light to the nations. As we reach the end of this powerful journey of revelation, I want to take a moment to remind you of the profound truth we've uncovered together. The stories we read in the Bible, the stories of God's chosen people, were never meant to be distorted or hidden. For centuries, the truth about the identity of God's chosen people, the Israelites, was shrouded in layers of whitewashed imagery and erasure. But as we have explored today, the first chosen people of God were not distant or foreign to us. They were black, deeply rooted in Africa, and intricately connected to the divine. This truth changes everything we thought we knew about our spiritual heritage. You see, beloved, the erasure of the Black Israelites, their African roots, their divinely ordained purpose, has kept us from fully understanding who we truly are. For so long, we have been taught that the people of the Bible, those who walked with God and carried his covenant, looked nothing like us. But today, as the veil is lifted, we see clearly. We are the children of that same divine story. The same God who called the Israelites to be a light to the nations is the same God who calls us today to rise, to stand tall in our heritage, and to carry that light into the world. This journey is not just about reclaiming the identity of those who came before us. It's about healing from the centuries of spiritual disconnection, healing from the lies that told us we were not part of God's divine plan. As we come to understand that the first chosen people were like us, we are healing the wounds that have separated us from our spiritual inheritance. We are rediscovering the divine power that has always resided in us, a power that is linked to the legacy of our ancestors, to the promises made by God, and to the everlasting covenant. But with this truth comes responsibility. The Israelites were chosen by God to spread his light, to be a beacon of hope and salvation to the world. And now, beloved, it is our turn. The divine purpose placed upon them is the same purpose that is placed upon us. We are not just here to exist, we are here to make a difference, to walk in the light of God's truth, to carry his word into a world that desperately needs it. The divine calling that began with the Black Israelites is alive in us today. We are the continuation of that sacred journey, and it is time for us to step into our rightful place. In this moment, I want to invite you to take action. If this video has touched your heart, if it has given you a sense of belonging, or if it has helped you rediscover your own divine connection, I ask you to support this journey. Liking, subscribing, and sharing this video helps spread this truth to others who may need to hear it. Your support, no matter how small, is a seed that helps this message grow and reach even more people. We are in this together, beloved. Every moment, every click, every share brings us one step closer to healing, to reclaiming the divine purpose that was always ours. Your support is not just for this video, it is for the continuation of this mission. We are bringing the truth of the Black Israelites back into the world, and we are sharing the light of God's word. It is a mission of love, of healing, and of unity. If you believe in this message, if you see the value in what we're doing here, I humbly ask you to support it. Every contribution, every act of kindness is invaluable. Together we are changing the narrative, we are reclaiming our divine heritage, and we are walking boldly into a new chapter in God's story. If this message resonates with you, if it stirs something deep in your soul, I encourage you to comment and share your thoughts. Let's engage in conversation, let's challenge the old narratives, and let's reclaim the truth together. God's chosen people have always been part of the divine plan, and now we are taking our place in that story. Thank you for being part of this journey. Your energy, your support, and your faith in this mission mean more to me than words can express. May God bless you, and may his light continue to guide us all as we walk this sacred path together.